Welcome to the podcast, Neeraj.
Thank you.
I'm really excited to have you on the podcast. Obviously, you're the Chief Strategy Officer at Attabotics, and also you're deeply involved in the entrepreneur community here in Calgary. But before we get into all of that, perhaps give us a little backstory, who you are and what you're up to.
Yeah, so born and brought up in India, uh, studied my initial engineering in India, then went on to do my master's in Sweden. Then in between also I did a kind of a management degree from UCLA Anderson School of Management. Um, uh, I was very accidental entrepreneur, but I never worked for any company initially. So I started my first company, which is still running, and had gone through the entire cycle of ups and downs in entrepreneurship. I struggled for 7 years. When I started making money, I was not sure what to do with that money, so became an entrepreneur, became an angel investor, started investing money, burned my fingers again, learned a lot of things in that, became a seasoned angel investor. When I started investing, I said, okay, can I look at the ecosystem? 2013 started one of the incubators in India in Europe, and made it one of the biggest. We had 5,600 startups. Uh, uh, then got into legal tech space, created an ecosystem called Lockubator, which was definitely something with at that point of time at the initial stage, but then for last 4 years you might have seen a lot of good startups coming in. Um, Shifted to Canada 1.5 years back, became part of the ecosystem, found that, and I was traveling across the globe. I'm more like a global citizen in that nature, and very well networked. So found Canada to be very peculiar in terms of innovation index among top 10 countries and entrepreneurship index among top 10 countries. It's a lethal combination. And uh, have been part of the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Calgary, Alberta, and Canada, and been part of ecosystems in Ireland, in Sweden, in Israel, Switzerland, and US, and India, of course. So kind of very interesting. When I became part of Attabotics, this is one of the startups which everybody is looking forward to become successful, frankly. And it's into hardware space, like robotics space, plus a lot of analytics and very interesting opportunity uh, over here. Uh, Found it extremely interesting, and the team is awesome, management team is awesome, concept is awesome. So I'm part of it, and I'm able to contribute to it as well.
No, that's really awesome. Actually, one thing that really struck me, and I would love to pick your brain on this, was you mentioned that you're an angel investor.
Yeah.
And obviously, a lot of the audience listening are entrepreneurs or even aspiring entrepreneurs. So I'm curious, from your perspective, Neeraj, what's a unique skill that you look for in an entrepreneur that you're going to invest in?
So there's a very important aspect which we need to understand here: investment aspect. Investment has different stages, and every investor, be it angel, seed level, or pre-series A VCs, do bring a different kind of skill sets and requirements. I am at the stage where I do invest in early stage tech driven businesses. I look for companies which are between $2 to $5 million valuation. I don't invest if you're less than 2 million. I don't invest if you're more than 5 million. That's a sweet spot for me. I have a thumb rule. I don't take sweat equity unless I invest in your company. So that's another thing. When I look at the entrepreneur from my side of things, at the early stage, what entrepreneur wants it is something wherein, okay, I have a concept or a beta or MVP. I have couple of validation. Now from here, where do I go? And in order to go wherever I want to, I need money, because I, of course, am not able to generate enough revenue to go to the next stage. A part of it is valuation. A part of it connects to the valuation is revenue, your ability to sell product, and your ability to grow your organization and think beyond what's just a need right now. So I always have this thing called physics, chemistry, and maths. For me, the first thing is to understand physics. Physics means what domain are you in? Because I invest in tech in the areas which I do understand, like med tech or supply chain tech and these kind of areas. So, and around across AI, machine learning, analytics, and these kind of deep technologies. So for me, physics is important. Can I understand? For example, I don't understand probably pharmaceuticals. So for me, that doesn't work. So for me, the first thing is I should be able to see if I understand that business, not because of the opportunity set, but because I understand that business. So that's first. Then the chemistry comes into picture. When it is extremely important for me to understand the founders, understand what their goals are, understand their pain points, and understand if they are capable of doing things. So that's a chemistry. And then the last comes mathematics, where we start looking at the valuation and revenue. So I look at all these three aspects, but first is physics, second is chemistry, and third is mathematics. However, I always tell them that that's my formula, but investors should also have the similar formula. Entrepreneurs should have a similar formula for investors. They should first of all understand whether investors do understand the domain part of it. Then the chemistry, because early stage investors and late stage investors, there will be a lot of times kind of issues, so to say. And that's where the chemistry of that angel or that investor is extremely important to understand. And then the mathematics part, what kind of a philosophy these investors bring in. So I think this is extremely important understanding. Most of the times investor is so much busy with things that the only thing he can think of is money. Can somebody invest in me? Can somebody bring in 100,000, 200,000, half a million, or $1 million? That's a wrong approach, because I always say the problems don't start when you are failing. Problem actually starts when you are becoming successful, because you will talk about next stage of investors. You'll have to set up a board. You have to do 100 different things, and that's where suddenly previously whatever things you may have done wrong may start haunting you.
Mm, absolutely. One thing that I found um, that's happening with the whole interest in entrepreneurship, obviously with shows like the Shark Tank and all shows like that, there's huge interest in entrepreneurship right now. Um, and I was just curious, what'd be one piece of advice you'd give to entrepreneurs? Obviously, you've had your own journey and successful journey. So, if you could boil it down to one piece of good advice, what would you say?
You should actually understand the stakeholder who is going to buy your product. It may be a company, but within company, who's going to buy it? You should not say, oh, I have a B2B business, I have a HRMS platform, so everybody will buy it. It may be the HR head who's going to buy that thing within that organization. So one piece of advice is, while they can be market, you need to understand within the organization, or if it is B2C, who is the actual person who will buy your product and sign it. In B2C, somebody will pay for it directly, but in B2B, within business, who is going to buy this? So that's one piece of advice that every entrepreneur should know. Understand who within the organization and who, as the individual, if you have a B2C model, is going to buy your product.
Absolutely. Speaking of buying, I'm curious. You said you're an angel investor, and I'm curious. Has there been, from what maybe you can share, has there been any companies or even entrepreneurs that you've really admired or even had successful exits?
I do admire a lot of companies, even when there have been successful exits, because early stage entrepreneurs, successful exit may be the next or next to next round.
Mhm.
Maybe some point of time you may go up to the stage where company may get acquired, or maybe at early stage get acquired. But I also admire companies which have failed but have done everything right. It's not just the science, but also a lot of luck which you require. But in all those companies, one of the important aspects which I have seen is clear communication between the stakeholders, investors, and the founders. because investors can also help you, and you need to take help of investors. But there has to be a clear communication among all of them. That's number one. So I really value those people. But at the same time, I really value these entrepreneurs because they are hustlers. They have, and whomsoever I've got involved with, many of them have been not only passionate about things, but they always understand that beyond certain stage, their ability to execute certain business model or development will get stuck. So they also very quickly understand that they always have to hire smarter people than what they are. So that's why I really appreciate those people, and I really appreciate what they have done in terms of understanding the market, developing the product, and also understanding the each stage of that startup life cycle.
Absolutely. Stepping back a little bit, you mentioned that you started a company so early on in your career that I'm curious what sort of resources have really helped you along the way to have that sustaining, successful entrepreneurship journey?
My first one was so my first company was a failure. In 1.5 years, whatever could go wrong had gone wrong.
Oh,
You know, and I failed. But that gave me so much experience that I, even if I was successful, I wouldn't have got that kind of experience. That 1.5 years taught me a lot of things. But at each stage, I got, number one, a very good co-founder. That's one of the most important aspect. Your co-founder has to be aligned with what you're doing. They will have a different personalities and everything, but at the end of the day, one thing where everybody would agree is that startup what you're working on. So the co-founders played a very important role in my life. That's number one. Number two, mentors and advisors. I got, the reason why I'm very passionate about contributing to the entrepreneurial ecosystem is because at very early stage, I had kind of advisors and mentors, and back then the concept of advisors and mentors were not so evident and prudent. Like, oh, there are advisors and mentors, and I always used to think, why the hell this guy is helping me? I mean, what does he want? And he never asked for anything, and I'm like, I don't understand you guys, but they were always supportive of everything. So and I always say that mentors, you need mentors for each phase. You may require a mentor for global expansion. You may require a mentor for understanding the equity model. You may require a mentor for business development. So you can have multiple mentors. And I was very fortunate to have the right kind of a mentoring. And then the third was, I was extremely lucky, to be very frank. So these are the three things which played very important role in my entrepreneurial journey. Of course, I was also extremely selective towards a good hiring, plan. Like I think it was extremely important for me to connect to the person and understand what he or she brings into the table. And till today also, whenever we hire, even at Attabotics and all, we kind of try and understand every hire, their objectives and perceptions about what they want to achieve. And that's where I think I've been good in selecting the good, right kind of colleagues in the organizations I've been part of. So yeah, and I have had a very good experience in HR, and I was part of. I had co-founded an HR company which got acquired. So that also helped me in this particular aspect.
that's great. One thing that I'm really curious about is you mentioned finding that co-founder that's really gonna pioneer your vision. You always hear that get a co-founder that complements your skills and you don't have necessarily the same skills, but different skills. But from your perspective, Neeraj, how do you go about finding that co-founder?
Um, there are two levels to it: personal and professional. You know, co-founder is The one on the personal level is somebody who understands you. You know, uh, entrepreneurship is extremely tough. You'll go through a lot of mental ups and downs, a lot. And you cannot always rely on your family to understand everything, you know. So co-founder at the personal level is the one who understands you, who understand what you have gone through. A lot of good entrepreneurs are a bit crazy in a positive manner. to, so you have to live with that. You know, the bigger problem with co-founders are, oh, you know what, this is the co-founder, let's just kind of tolerate him. That should not be the approach. It should be, okay, let's understand each other. Let's try and figure out. It's almost like a marriage. So you need to resolve your issues and you need to very quickly understand each other. So at a personal level, that's very important. At a professional level, I always say that co-founding team and immediately after that, whatever team should be such that if hypothetically all the employees leave the company, you should be able to still run the small size operation. So unless you do not have that, like a lot of tech driven startups come to us saying, we are working on this. I come from e-commerce background and I have a lot of experience into that and I can do things and I have outsourced my entire software team to this particular company. While I don't have any problem with that, but if you don't have a tech co-founder wherein your tech plays important role, then if you remove this outsourcing company, in total, you will not be able to run that operation. So I always say that co-founding team and the immediately after that, whatever hires you have, they together should be able to execute the smaller size operation of your startup. So you should always look for that kind of a co-founder
Well,
or the series of co-founders.
yeah, absolutely. No, I totally agree. I think having that a co-founder that really complements you and they understand what you're going through. Like you mentioned, entrepreneurship is ups and downs and lefts and rights, and it's a crazy journey. But even particularly recently with the pandemic, we talked a little bit off air, but how has the pandemic affected you? Could be professionally or personally, the last 4 or 5 months.
Since I have gone through three cycles of ups and downs, around 2000 and then 2009, 10, and then 2015, I kind of have become fearless in the sense that I don't get scared of the situation. I always find good avenues and good opportunities during these tough times. And you know, in business startup world, there is something called value of death. You know, and I always say that a startup at every stage will go through valley of death in its own way. It's not that early stage you will go through valley of death, you will be successful. You may go to the next stage and there may be a small valley of death. And that valley of death may be for different reasons. And pandemic is another kind of a valley of death and you have to come out of that side of it. I am seeing a lot of startups which essentially um, are affected because of this, have been very open to their employees and colleagues. They have told them this is the situation, we need you, we may not be able to pay your salaries, but in next 6 months things are going to go to the positive side of business. Why don't you help us? They have created different plans in terms of ESOPs and equity restructuring and stuff like that, and they are able to strengthen their product. Because when you talk about startup, the investor will be like, okay, I'm giving you money. In next 12 months, what will you do out of it? How will you generate your revenue? And many a times you will find many of the startups, more than 70% of the startups will develop something and start deploying it. And there'll be multiple issues in that product, right? And since you keep getting money infused, you keep growing the business, but a lot of times you don't get the time to just relax and see, look at the product, make changes, and go to the next stage. One of my friends, his name is Ray DePaul, and Calgary, one of the biggest influencers in startup ecosystem. He termed pandemic as unfortunate gift of time,
Mm.
and I love that. It's unfortunate gift of time. Make use of this time because your investors will not push you for revenue. They will, but they will not push you for revenue. They'll say, okay, survive. strengthen your product. So you really have unfortunate gift of time. Make use of this time. Strengthen your product. So pandemic really has not affected me much mentally. Uh, from the strategy point of view, many of the startups I'm part of or the companies I am part of, um, I kind of have spoken to them, I've told them what may be the better strategy to manage this. And people who will survive this pandemic will definitely come out stronger. And look at the other side of things. More than 40 to 50% of your competition who may not be able to survive is something wherein you will be in the rest of that 50% lot. So your competition will be much lesser.
Absolutely. If you, I guess, the survival of the fittest. Whoever survives gets kind of the lion's share of whatever's available. But yeah, it's interesting. The new normal. What's gonna look like? I guess stepping back though, how's Calgary changed, or even entrepreneurship changed in Calgary from when you first started to where we are today?
So last 1.5 years, I have seen a drastic change in Calgary's mindset. Number one, what I have seen is so you need to understand a very important aspect that Calgary or these kind of a similar cities, um, you not only need a reason to start a company or survive and support from the government, but also need the external world to start looking at you. What I've seen in last 1.5 years is North American markets like US and all, European ecosystems have started coming to Calgary. Places like Platform Calgary, places like Tech Edmonton, have have created a kind of open innovation and startup ecosystem, wherein a lot of external ecosystems have started coming in. We need to also understand one aspect. Calgary, in that sense, is very the proximity to Vancouver and Seattle and Bay Area also helps you. You know, so what I have seen in terms of not only change in the mindset of entrepreneurs and investors, I've seen change in the mindset of big ecosystems as well as large corporates who have started helping and supporting these startups, and which is something which was required, and which is something which I really admire. That's number one. Number two, I've seen a lot of capital infusion at the early stage in last 1.5 years. A lot of good angels who may not be seasoned entrepreneur, but who may have made money by being part of large corporates and all. They have started infusing money in the startups, which is extremely important because seed level investment is important. Organizations like NACO, National Angel Capital Organization, last year they did their startup event in Calgary. So all these players have started looking into it. Last 1.5 years, I've seen at least six funds coming into the picture, and there are specific funds. One of my friend runs this fund called AIoT Health, which is a health and tech fund. So I think from investment point of view, I am seeing a lot of progress. From ecosystem point of view, I'm seeing a lot of progress. From corporate venturing point of view, I'm seeing a lot of progress. And from government support point of view, I'm seeing a lot of progress. I think you know that Alberta is one of those provinces where you have something called micro vouchers. Alberta Innovates gives it to you. So if you apply and if they like it, then you will I kind of get up to 10,000. I may be the numbers may not be exactly correct, but up to $10,000 to create your IP and market research study. And if everything goes fine, then you get the additional $100,000.
Wow.
And you don't get it. Your like whomsoever is working, your vendor work gets it. But these kind of avenues and these kind of support from government is also extremely needed. So I think that ways Alberta has all the right kind of a constituent. And then you might be hearing about companies which during pandemic have raised money. We as Attabotics have raised money. There are 3 4 more companies which have raised money. Companies like Benevity. And so there are, you also need, when I was in India, one of the companies called Flipkart into e-commerce became so huge. They raised like, I think overall $1 billion. and then they were acquired in $18 billion by Walmart. That one company changed the entire startup culture. Because of that company, thousands of e-commerce companies started flourishing around e-commerce, supply chain, logistics, analytics started happening. You need one or two such case studies. For example, in Canada, Shopify, and there are several other good case studies. And I think Alberta is going in the right direction. There are at least five winners who in next probably 1 year or 2 years will become multi-cons. And I kind of there's new term called Sunicorn. Sunicorn is soon to become unicorns. So there are multiple Sunicorns, which is important. You need role models.
Absolutely. And hopefully, Attabotics will be one of those Sunicons in the near future.
I mean,
but what's something that uh, you're curious about right now? I know everybody's talking about pandemic, new normal, but for you personally, what's something that you're really curious about?
mental health of an entrepreneur.
Mm.
Uh, COVID has been tough. Entrepreneurs also draw the energy by interacting with people, talking to people. I know, Zoom and Teams and everything, you can talk, but you cannot get that kind of, feel or vibe when you meet person. I personally, in last 2 weeks, I've started meeting a lot of people over coffee and all. And I'm so happy. I'm so happy when I meet those guys. Like one of my friends uh, who is part of the immigration and startup ecosystem, Haider, and I was meeting him in a couple of days back, and I felt so good. We were chatting with each other, but when we met, it was a different kind of a vibe. So I think the mental health of the entrepreneur has taken a bit of a toll because of you know they were always alone at times, but now because of COVID that has happened. So I think I'm worried about that, extremely worried when you talk about the startup ecosystem. And other part of it is definitely the investment scenario, to whatever extent it was going, may not be the same. So everybody will have to start thinking about not only during pandemic but post pandemic there may be another financial pandemic that is that is going to come. So I'm only worried about these two aspects, and it's more psychological. And I think we all will have to ensure that we take care of the friends and entrepreneurs who are doing things, so we need to support them.
No, absolutely. I think that's super important. Mental health. I mean, I always say mental health is wealth. That's the only type of wealth, but no, that's totally important. One other thing I wanted to ask you was, uh, what sort of I know you mentioned mentors and co-founders, but has there been anything you've read or even listened to that's really inspired you?
Oh yeah, I mean, I go through a lot of autobiographies and biographies of successful founders and even the failures. So that inspires me a lot. Just like any other entrepreneur, I love Steve Jobs and what he has done. I think many of the people may not agree with him, but I do. I I have had opportunity to interact with a lot of successful entrepreneurs who exited, and I could get a lot of advice and insights from them. That's another important aspect. And just by networking, and networking is the key. I mean, close to 15 years back, when I was like 5 years old in entrepreneurship world, a mentor came and told me, you need to connect to at least one person every day and network them. It doesn't matter whether every day you're doing it, but on an average, every day one person. Even if you're connecting somebody through LinkedIn, you need to ensure you talk to them. You just not just connect. And that has been my mantra. I have 30,000 connects in LinkedIn, and you can only have 30,000 connects, and after that, you can have followers. And more than 90% of them, I have interacted with them in some sort of others. So, um, um, networking also helps you learn a lot of things faster. So I've been I mean there are a lot of inspirational discussions which I have had directly or indirectly with founders. And I mean, think about Attabotics, the founder Scott. When I met him for the first time, we were supposed to meet for half an hour. We ended up having that day the discussion for 8 hours.
What?
You
Wow.
know, we were like talking, and the next day again. And I got inspired from him. Like he's an awesome guy. So inspiration doesn't only come from role models like Steve Jobs and those kind of people, but also uh, from the ecosystem, and you meet them and you learn a lot of things. So yeah, it has been inspiration, but books have played very important role. I read a lot of books, and that has helped me increase my knowledge base, so to say.
Awesome. Not to put you on the spot, but what has been your favorite book you've read so far?
Steve Jobs, all the books, whatever Steve Jobs books
Whatever,
have
Steve.
come. I've read every possible book, even if those books have not been bestsellers, but I've read those books. So anything you pick up for Steve Jobs is something which I have I greatly admire. You know, apart from that, a lot of management books I like it, but they may not be necessarily around startups, but around management. I do admire that, but my personal favorites have been all the books which have been on Steve Jobs.
Awesome. I only have a few more questions here for you,
Sure.
Neeraj. One thing I always get into discussions with peers and just other entrepreneurs are the myths behind entrepreneurship. So I'm curious to get your perspective. What are kind of the, or what is the biggest myth about entrepreneurship that you wish would be debunked?
I think one of the myths about entrepreneurship is, I guess that you know finding a co-founder is easy. That's one of the first myths which I've seen. Like starting up is tough. I know that. But one of the most important myths is, oh, I have an idea. Let me start and I'll find an entrepreneur. This is a myth. Finding an entrepreneur is tougher than starting a company. So that's the first thing which I feel is a myth about startup or entrepreneurship. Um, Second one is that if you have a good amount of revenue, you will definitely get funded is a myth.
Mm,
you know the right kind of money is not something which is only the function of your revenue. Is the function of cumulative set of things: your product, your vision, your gap, market need, your ability to penetrate that market, and the revenue which are early stage, some people who are verifying that and validating it. Validation, you always go for a low hanging fruits, people whom you know, and they will support you. But beyond that, it becomes tougher and tougher. So the another myth is that if you have a good amount of revenue, you will be successful is a wrong way of approaching startup. You should have revenue. Revenue is the most important kicker. But beyond revenue, you need to also understand that the moment you become successful, there are you look at any trend, any company that has raised more than 10 to 20 million dollars in particular domain, within next 3 months you will see like 100 more companies getting acquired at different stages in the same domain, right? So thinking that my revenue and the current revenue is going to make me successful is a myth. You have to think about every possible aspect, because remember, there's another better entrepreneur than you who may be thinking to solve the problem in a different way, but who may be able to approach it in much efficient way. So that's a myth. That's the second thing. And third myth is that just keep working on everything. Don't think about other process in terms of your cap table structure and all those sort of thing. It's a myth. If you think that you will be able to solve those issues at the later stages, if you commit huge mistakes at the early stages, it's going to haunt you and it's going to cost you a lot. So you need to, as an entrepreneur, learn about those aspects as well, which may not be immediately needed, but understanding what kind of a board you want, understanding what kind of equity structure you want, even not only the current stage, but after series A, B, C, all those things have to be taken care of. It's a myth that later on you can have best of the law firms and they will sort these things out. No, You need to look at those aspects right from the very beginning.
No, I love that you say that because many entrepreneurs, even first-time founders, just don't know what they don't know. So having that awareness that you need to know about these things, at least maybe you don't need it right now, but down the line, it's really important.
Yeah, I mean, you look at one simple thing, founders agreement. I can tell you today, more than 50% of the startups globally won't be having founders agreement if there are more than one founder. Founders agreement is one of the most important aspect you should have. You should have a founders agreement in place. So, so all these myths that things will be better at the later stages. As I said, when you'll be start becoming successful, things will start haunting you if whatever you have done in the past. So ensure that all those things are right, and that's why I will say you should definitely have a lawyer who's your advisor in your company. You should definitely have a chartered accountant or a CFO, even if you cannot afford him, make him your advisor in your company. All these things will help you later on. And investors like us always like if entrepreneurs have that understanding, because you remember one thing, the only thing you have in your startup is your equity. If you don't like your equity, if you don't love your equity, if you're not passionate about your equity, I'm scared that what will happen later on. so
Yeah,
so you
exactly.
need to you need to have all the right kind of tools and understanding of how you will run your company and how you will kind of assign those equities and what kind of things you have in mind uh, for your cap table and this structuring part of it.
Absolutely. I'm sure you've, like you mentioned, you've interacted with many entrepreneurs. They'd probably ask you tons of questions, but maybe what's one question that you never get asked that you wish you would be asked?
Uh, Probably, what is going to be your sales strategy after Series A, and how will you manage it? Um, Many a times, two people who always are missing in many of the good startups are sales and marketing guys. You will find a passionate tech entrepreneur who will start thinking about creating something which is like Twitter or Facebook or Shopify, and you will love them. They have understanding of it. They know how to build it. There is a market need. You'll find another person who will probably will be a decent business guy. But sales and marketing functions, at times people don't understand that these are two different functions. At times they don't understand how they're aligned. At times they do not understand what kind of a people they require in sales and marketing. I learned the hard way. I failed. Then again, I started doing it. I always say I'm one of the best sales guys, but it was not the case 15 years back. I learned it, but I think the founder is the best sales guy. And even if you can hire the right kind of person, you should know what exactly you need in that particular person. So I think this is the time when the investor should start asking about who is your sales guy and who's your marketing person. Even if you cannot hire right now, you should have the understanding of it. These are the two functions which are extremely important for a product to be successful.
Absolutely. You got to have your top cheerleaders, cheerlead your vision. But yeah, no, I'm super excited to have you on the podcast. I really appreciate you being on. Where can our listeners connect with you online?
Um, I'm sorry, can come again? What do you say?
Where can our listeners connect with you online?
Uh, if they want to connect with me, you mean to say?
Yeah,
I have my LinkedIn. You can search me at Neeraj Gupta and Attabotics, and you will find me. I have a Twitter handle. If you type Neeraj Gupta and Attabotics, you'll find me. These are the two best ways to connect with me, if they can. Apart from that, uh, there's you can get in touch with me at Neeraj at attabotics.com, and I'll try my best to respond back as soon as possible.
awesome. I really appreciate that. I usually like to end the podcast with the guest saying a quote, a story, or a question for the audience. So my last question to you is if you have any quotes, stories, or even a question to leave the audience remembering you.
The only thing which I can suggest for all the entrepreneurs is, even if you are going to start or if you have already started, Ask yourself, why did you start that company, or why you are going to start that startup? The job, this is the best opportunity for me to start the entrepreneurship, or this space is hot and I can do better. Ask yourself really why you want to start this company, and what will you do after 2 or 3 years down the line, and what will be what, I mean, you need to envision about why you started this company and what do you want to achieve from this. And there is no thumb rule. It can be intellectual satisfaction, it can be financial satisfaction, it can be 100 different things. But ask yourself and remember that all the time. So that's the only suggestion I can uh, give. And the second suggestion is network, network, and network.
I appreciate that, Neeraj.